Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Lawcast. This time, we're finally doing another ECW show. Huge, it's what the people wanted.
When we listen to people tell us about what shows they want us to do, by and large, the most requested ones are like ECW and TNA. Unfortunately, those are often the worst shows to watch or the hardest ones to actually track down and find, which is why we don't do more of them. It's not just that we don't want to do what you guys want to see. But we got so many requests from ECW, and I even got one from my wife who listens to the podcast and was like, hey, can you guys do something different, please? So finally, we had to do it, right?
It's rough when we're getting dogged by Mrs. Cush for doing too many WWF and WCW shows.
Yeah, that is rough. I'm getting dogged from the living room while I'm recording the shows.
So here, we're finally doing another ECW show. Way back at the very beginning of this podcast, we did Barely Legal. So if you want to dig way into the archives, you can find that. It's on YouTube. It's available someplace if you want to hear it. We get into lots of stuff there. We talk about the mass transit incident, which I'd love to cover more in detail some other time. But we're finally doing more ECW. Somehow we had done more WWECW shows than real ECW shows to date.
Which is really just because Bobby Lashley was on those, and that was my personal preference. But yes, it's also on the SoundCloud archive. If you want to go on there, that's where all of our old shows are if you don't want to see them on the YouTube site. But yeah, it's been so long, and there's so much ground to cover. Like, I feel like this could easily, despite the show not being all that great or being all that interesting in ring-wise, I feel like we could do 10 hours just on the people involved.
That is the thing, is we just haven't gotten into any of this. We haven't talked about Mick Foley and ECW. We haven't talked about the Raven and Tommy Dreamer feud. We haven't talked a lot about Shane Douglas. We never talked about the double cross of the NWA. Like, we're going to get into all this right in a minute here.
Hell yeah.
So in my mind, 1995 is ECW's best year. This is their peak. This is when they have the most talent. This is when they get the luchadors. They get Benoit, Guerrero, Malenko. They've still got Taz. They got Sabu, Shane Douglas. Bam Bam Bigelow, I believe, comes in towards the end of the year. Like, this is as good as it got. Like, later in this year, they get raided by WCW when Bischoff needs more talent for Nitro. So they lose Benoit, Guerrero, Mysterio, Conan, Psychosis. That's always, in my mind, been the tragedy of ECW, is that by the time they actually got on pay-per-view, they were kind of a shell of what they had been. And in my mind, what they had been was never that great, but in truth, this is just not my style of wrestling.
Oh, no, definitely not mine either. It's ironic that exact same thing happened to Ring of Honor when they went on pay-per-view. Yeah. Like, it was already past their peak. Nobody was really all that interested in it at that point. It's very hard to be an indie promotion, because once you get to a point where you get mainstream relevance, that's when the mainstream promotions start to take a look at your roster and be like, well, people know who these guys are now. Let's take them and use them for our show.
Yeah, and you can never compete financially with the big boys. Like,
absolutely not. So
I don't know what Heyman was paying guys. Heyman wasn't paying guys well if he was paying them at all, if their checks were even clearing.
Yeah, that's the thing. So it's inevitable. And like the story of ECW the entire time after basically 1995, this year, is just a constant attempt to replace what has been stolen from them. And to some extent, sometimes they succeed. Sometimes you get your Rob Van Dams and stuff further down the line. But mostly, it gets worse. Because how can it be the same, right? You spend years and years establishing these characters and personalities. As they get chipped away one by one, you don't have years to replace them. It's diminishing returns. It happens everywhere.
So, big watershed moment was back the previous August of 1994 when ECW, which was still Eastern Championship Wrestling at the time, hosted a tournament to crown a new NWA World Heavyweight Champion. The NWA title had been vacant for almost a year at that point, since WCW and the NWA split. For a little while there, WCW had both the WCW title and the NWA title as two separate titles on their show. That was a Bill Watts thing. Eric Bischoff wasn't a fan of it, so he deliberately did things to antagonize the NWA board until they just pulled out.
It's very funny, actually.
Yeah, the straw that broke the camel's back was when he went to put the NWA title on Rick Rude without getting their approval.
Which, it's amazing that there's even an NWA board still at this point. Like, it's just
on it. Dennis Coraluzzo, and I don't know who else.
I don't know. It's going to continue on. Basically, the NWA board continues on until like 2005 in some form or another, until finally TNA drops them and they just have nowhere else to go.
This belt is still around. It's actually, I'd say the NWA as a promotion is the strongest it's been in a long time right now.
Yeah, but that was after a number of years where like a random lawyer named Bruce Tharp just bought the shit and basically just defended the title on other people's shows to keep the concept alive.
So, in the finals of that tournament, ECW champion Shane Douglas beat Too Cold Scorpio to become the new NWA World Heavyweight Champion, but this was a trap. Heyman did not get along with Dennis Coraluzzo, who was the head promoter of another NWA affiliate up there in New Jersey, up there in the Northeast. I believe Coraluzzo promoted New Jersey, so right across the river from ECW in Philadelphia. Heyman and Todd Gordon and Coraluzzo had been butting heads, and I see Heyman and Gordon's perspective that, like, the NWA is a dead brand, and they are piggybacking off ECW's success at this point. What the fuck does ECW need the NWA for?
Oh, it must be said, this is basically an ECW show. Everyone in the tournament is ECW talent. It's nothing but ECW. They're just attempting to make an NWA champion that ECW fans will also be interested in. Like, that's pathetic, and that's all you can really say about it. Though this also goes into a bigger issue, which is there are no territories anymore. There are no places for the NWA title to be defended. Everyone always talks about how WWF and WCW sucked up the territories, but ECW kind of does the same thing. All the relevant indie talent that there is that isn't signed to a mainstream contract is in ECW. There's nobody else. There's no other promotions. There's no other talent. This is the worst the independent scene ever was, literally in the history of professional wrestling.
The only other territory is Smoky Mountain, and they're not going to be around for much longer.
It's literally, ECW survives by being the first super independent, by being literally vacuuming up all the possible talent that could be gestating in other promotions. It all just comes to this one spot. Ring of Honor basically did the same thing. And when super indies are on top, the independent scene is fast and horrifying because there's no stars anywhere.
Yeah, so I think there was also an issue with Coraluzzo and Douglas specifically. I don't remember what it was. I think they had some kind of dispute back in the day, and I think Coraluzzo didn't want Douglas as his champion because he had no show to show that Coraluzzo had promoted, something like that. But Douglas has to be talked into doing this by Heyman and Gordon, but he says he was guided by advice his dad had given him when he was younger, which was, take care of the people who take care of you. And at this point, Heyman and Gordon had been taking care of him after he had a really bad run in WCW where they turned him into a joke. He had revived his career in ECW, so he decided to be loyal to Heyman and Gordon and go along with the double cross.
Which winds up being literally the best thing that ever could have happened to his career, and is the moment that basically cemented him in wrestling history. So I'm sure he's glad he did it now.
So, as he said, in the tradition of Lou Thez, in the tradition of Jack Briscoe of the Briscoe brothers, of Dory Funk Jr., of Terry Funk, the man who will never die, as the real Nature Boy Buddy Rogers upstairs tonight, from the Harley Races to the Barry Windhams to the Ric Flairs, I accept this heavyweight title. Wait a second. Of Kerry Von Erich, of the fat man himself, Dusty Rhodes. This is it tonight, Dad. God, that's beautiful. And Ricky Steamboat, and they can all kiss my ass. because I am not the man who accepts to be a torch to be handed down to me from an organization that died rip 7 years ago. The franchise, Shane Douglas, is the man who ignites the new flame of the sport of professional wrestling. Tonight, before God and my Father as witness, I declare myself, the franchise, as the new ECW heavyweight champion of the world. We have set out to change the face of professional wrestling, so tonight, let the new era begin. The era of the sport of professional wrestling, the era of the franchise, the era of the ECW.
That is
Woo, boy.
one of the greatest promos in wrestling history.
That rocks.
Yeah, it's funny because it's so good that it gives Douglas like a reputation as a great promo for the rest of his career when he's really not.
Yeah, just it all came together there.
It's just his absolute contempt for the NWA, which was absolutely real. He hated Ric Flair and Dusty Rhodes like they had stolen his money, and in his opinion, they probably did.
So much.
And like the opportunity, like no one else ever could have thrown the belt to the ground with that level of scorn. Like you probably wouldn't have been able to convince anyone else to do this shit. Like if Too Cold Scorpio wins this tournament, they're not talking him into doing this.
The most hilarious part is the interview with Dennis Coralluzzo from right afterwards that I've seen, where he's like, well, Shane Douglas is the NWA champion, whether he wants to be or not.
Yeah, whether he likes it or not.
And then he explains that, like, we'll be convening a meeting of the board, and I'll move to strip Shane Douglas of both the NWA title and the Eastern Eastern Championship Wrestling heavyweight. Who cares? Nobody cares about this bureaucracy. The NWA is dead.
And
he killed it.
That's the stunning thing, is that it was very difficult for things on the independent scene to like make the rounds nationally at this point. Really, the only way for them to do that is through the Abner mags. Like, you had to do it through the magazines. There wasn't like an internet, really, that you could like send this clip around to. But the word gets around that he said this and that he did this, and in Meltzer's newsletters, he covers it, and basically the entire world just accepts that the NWA is now dead. That this one act has literally shot the NWA in the head. RIP, they're toast.
So ECW withdraws from the NWA and rebrands themselves as Extreme Championship Wrestling. They are the last outlaw organization.
And let's take a second to look at what they're up against, right? They, as the last basically independent promotion, because at this point in wrestling history, as you said, there's basically Smoky Mountain, ECW, and WCW and WWE, and that's the American wrestling scene. Yeah. And WCW and WWE are on their asses, but even so, ECW was looking at, they have no real competition except those higher two, which are hopelessly outgunning them in terms of money, in terms of influence, in terms of mainstream television time, stuff like
distribution, production value.
Yeah.
Name talent, and also it's the worst like time for the wrestling business in forever. Like 1995 is the bottom. Like WWE is running house shows in high school gyms at this point.
Yeah, the majority of the major stars have left the business entirely. The major promotions aren't lighting anything on fire, so you're not getting like residual attention. Because that's when the independent scenes tend to light up, is when the rest of the wrestling industry gets a lot of attention. Because in local shows, kids get interested in wrestling. Oh, hey, look, there's a local show. Let's go. That's how independent companies make their money. This is the idea that they could ever compete with something like that running out of their bingo hall in Philadelphia is genuinely unfathomable. And realistically, they never actually do. But that they ever reach the heights that they do is... insane.
They became a national promotion.
Yeah.
They got on national TV. They started running shows all over the country. They were on pay-per-view. I mean, their best, the most money they ever grossed was their last year in business in 2000 because they ran a bunch of pay-per-views. They were still doing strong houses, touring nationally. It's just they kind of hit a strangle point where they lost their TV deal. and then the pay-per-view companies wouldn't pay them because everybody knew they were going out of business.
And the difficulty that they had in getting even to that point, because the idea of getting wrestling on TV that wasn't WWE or WCW just wasn't even a fathomable thing. Like, you couldn't get it anywhere. They had to fight so hard just to get on pay-per-view. Not good pay-per-view, not in a good time slot, just to be recognized as something like that pay-per-view would even accept. And just they fought and they created all these milestones that other companies after them got to. It's an incredible accomplishment what they did. Like, we're going to bury a lot about ECW over the course of this podcast, but I just want to put in context how absolutely incredible of an accomplishment this company was just for existing the way that it did.
Yeah, I mean, easy to dog them for running a bingo hall, but to draw 1,000 people like every week in 1995 is not easy. I mean, WCW would run shows where they'd barely draw 1,000 people at this point. WWE would run shows where they barely drew 1,000 people.
And it's not just 1,000.
That's touring nationally, not running the same arena every single week.
Yeah, and it's not just 1,000 people. It's 1,000 people who live and die by your product, which is something that no other company has at this point.
This is the year where Heyman buys the company from Gordon. I don't know the exact date, but he's been running the creative for several years at this point anyway.
Yeah, and he feels like he has to do that because it turns out that Todd Gordon is the one funneling people to WCW. That's not great for them.
No, but then Heyman ends up funneling people to the WWF for money.
But at least he gets money for it. Though I'm going to guess that Todd Gordon
money for it.
I mean, at least it's a business decision.
Into his own bank account, not to pay the boys with.
Well, look, I'm not defending him. I'm just saying.
Scumbag. They've added some big hitters to their roster, in 1995. Terry Funk, Cactus Jack, Raven, and Eddie Guerrero's just come in a few weeks before this. They've really got a pretty loaded roster when you look up and down. Not a bad crew here.
And the story of how they get some of this talent is just so goddamn fascinating to me. Like, Eddie Guerrero is coming off of being, like, he's just basically doing an American tour after being basically the hottest heel in all of Mexico with Art Barr. Like, they get Rey Mysterio because they do a deal with Conan, and this is what the deal that convinces Conan that he can just sell all the luchadors to everybody else. And that's just what happens.
When Worlds Collide, the AAA pay-per-view was only 6 months before this, right? That was like November 94. Yeah, people need to understand the kind of economic context for this. The Mexican economy crashed.
Yes.
And the peso lost all of its value. So suddenly what the wrestlers were being paid was far less than it was before.
And which is why they all crashed. It was literally the hottest Mexican wrestling had ever been.
They were drawing in America. They were doing a tour of the Southwest and West Coast where they were drawing 10,000 people per night. It was insane how much they were drawing compared to what WWF and WCW was doing.
And it's arguable that like most of the hottest talent in the entire world was in Mexico at this point. Like it's just had been that liquid hot, and like they had all of this talent, and literally they lose all of their top talent within the space of like 2 years. It's gone.
It's a huge what if, isn't it?
Yes. If the economy doesn't break,
if Art Barr doesn't die and the economy doesn't crash,
like if those two things don't happen, I don't think Eddie ever leaves Mexico because there's just no reason to. Like that's the smallest of it.
Yeah, he would have been such a huge star there, and there would have been more money being a mega star there than being a mid-carder in WCW like he was.
Yeah, Conan never leaves AAA because he's a god there, so nobody ever brokers any of these deals with WCW or whatever. Like the business is so strong, they don't need to go to WCW, and maybe it's more on even terms rather than WCW just stealing all their talent.
Benoit probably ends up being a AAA guy. I can envision him just being brought in by the guys he knows from New Japan.
There's a chance Jericho never leaves Mexico, though he wanted to go to WWF for whatever reason. Like that was his own thing.
What he had grown up on. He grew up in New York.
Yeah, but just they were making such gigantic stars out of people from other countries. Like it was almost the way like New Japan is now. It was similar. The hotness that AAA had at that time was very similar to what New Japan has now, actually. And they were looking to get into like Telemundo in the States. They were going to be on TV, and they just lost it all overnight.
Funk returned to ECW a couple months before this in February at a show called Return of the Funker.
Sure.
Spoiler alert. And he attacked Cactus Jack. He was determined to prove that he was the true king of hardcore. Foley has come over from WCW after he left the previous year. Turned down a $150,000 guaranteed contract with WCW to go kill himself for his art.
That's one of the more fascinating things that's ever happened, because getting Cactus Jack is one of the most important things for ECW. Yeah. Like, he, maybe more than any one individual person, kind of personified their brand and what they wanted to be. And they only really get him because he's so depressed and sad that he wants to kill himself in WCW. He literally creates a situation where he's trying to get Vader to end his career so he can live off Lloyd's of London money. And he realizes that he'd rather make no money for his art than continue getting paid well to be a wrestler, which is, he's maybe the only wrestler ever to make that decision.
And the WWF doesn't want him because Vince McMahon thinks he's a disgusting slob.
I mean, he kind of is at this point.
Oh, man. The story of, like, Vince signed Mick Foley to prove a point to Jim Ross. Like, yes. JR had been advocating to Vince to sign Foley for literally years, and Vince was finally like, all right, I'll do it because I need you to learn that you're wrong about this.
Yeah, we'll bring him in, we'll push the shit out of him, and then when he fails, it's in your fucking face, Jim Ross.
Yeah. JR just sipping his drink, but that's none of my business. Cactus hasn't turned heel yet, but that's coming very soon, and it will be some of the best stuff ever in wrestling history, which we use a lot of superlatives on this show. Kane Dewey might actually be the best promo in wrestling history.
Yeah, just the anti-hardcore Kane Dewey trying to convince Tommy Dreamer to sell out because the ECW fans are trash.
Don't end up like me, Tommy. I can never go back because of the things I've done, but you still have a chance.
Like, I get chills watching that promo because of the truth.
So real.
Like,
when he chokes up when he talks about, like, his son asking, like, why they don't live at their house in Atlanta anymore, and him having to tell him, like, sorry, your dad turned down a $100,000 contract so we could go live in a sweatbox apartment on Long Island.
It's incredibly emotional, and we know from further on in the future that Mick Foley is basically insane. Like, he's maybe way too emotional for the wrestling industry, and this is the highest his art ever got. This is where, like, his emotionally scarred psyche matches up with his actual talent and just creates something magical. Like, you can go back and watch these promos and they won't ever not hold up. Like, these will be as good as they were when they aired until the end of time. Like, it's beautiful.
Raven debuted in ECW in January and set his sights on Tommy Dreamer. Scott Levy's previous runs in wrestling, he had always been a pretty boy. He was Scotty the Body. He was Scotty Flamingo. He was the Man of Leisure, Johnny Polo. With Raven, he goes 180 degrees in the opposite direction and becomes this grungy dirtbag with greasy long hair and jean shorts and piercings. Have you heard the story that this is inspired by Patrick Swayze's character in Point Break?
Yes, by Patrick Swayze's character in Point Break. That is where he got, like, the cult leader idea.
Yeah.
Now, here's my favorite thing about the whole Raven character, is that after Scott Levy leaves WCW, and I think it was WWF, actually, that was the last stop.
Yeah, he had been Johnny Polo before this.
He leaves, and he comes up with this character himself. He's literally, like, smoking a blunt, watching Point Break, and he comes up with the idea, because he had also been
rented Point Break from Blockbuster.
And literally, he's like doing that while he's reading Edgar Allan Poe, because sure, that's what a
Why
pretentious
not?
person would do. And so he just comes up with the idea of this character. He
Quote the Raven,
tries.
nevermore.
Paul Heyman takes complete credit for this character, which is one of the scummier things about Paul Heyman, and that's a long list. Raven had this idea fully formed and pitched it to Jim
Yeah,
Cornette and Smoky Mountain first,
and Cornette did not get it.
which that's not a surprise.
I mean, yeah, I was gonna say Cornette did do New Jack and the Gangstas, but like that was just for the racism,
I say he understood racism. He didn't
not
understand grunge.
grunge. No,
Which is funny because this character was so strong it may have potentially turned his business around.
what a perfect character for the moment.
Yes. It just that's what it takes sometimes. Just one guy to actually get it and just force everyone else to get it.
It exemplifies that era.
Oh man. Like this is a great character. There are parts of the Tommy Dreamer Raven feud that are just not very good and have been way overblown over time. But just that initial mystery that comes with Raven, like who the fuck is this guy?
Yeah, and
And
he really took his time explaining what the backstory was, but he had finally done it the week before this at the three-way dance show, where he explained they had been childhood friends, but Dreamer had always bullied him, and he debuted Beulah McGillicuddy as his girlfriend and valet, explaining she had been fat when she was a girl, and Dreamer had bullied her too, and now she's smoking hot and back for revenge with the world's ugliest man.
that's a like that's a genuinely really great backstory. Is the idea that like,
Yeah.
hey, babyface Dreamer over there, where he's a dickhead bully, and he's the one who turned me into this.
And he doesn't deny it, does he?
No, he's just like, yeah, I did that. Some little dweeb from when I was a kid. Now he's stalking me and he wants revenge. And it's like, well, you did that to yourself, Tommy Dreamer. That's the best kind of villains, is ones that you totally get.
It really is a great storyline.
Like, and that's what you always say about great villains, right? Is that they seem real, like they believe it.
It
And
makes he has a point. He takes it too
absolutely.
far, but he has a point. Like, no, he should probably not try to ruin Raven's life over this.
But if you had a high school bully, wouldn't part of you be like,
Yeah.
man, I wish I could ruin that dude's life right now? And that's all Raven's doing.
Did you ever see the Jason Bateman movie, The Gift?
No.
Very similar to this, and much better than you would ever expect.
That sounds about right.
My Lawcast recommendation of the week. Check out The Gift. I'm pretty sure it's on Netflix right now.
There you go. And they bring in all of these other elements into it too. Like the idea of Raven as a cult leader is probably the most important part of his character.
Yeah,
It's
not
just
like
that-
Bray Wyatt. He actually has followers.
Yeah, and it's just like he has this mysterious way with people where he's like abusive and shitty to them. Like he's got some Charles Manson to him.
Yeah.
But like they love it. And Stevie Richards, who badly wants to be him but just doesn't get it, so he's like wearing all the 80s hair metal t-shirts and wears crop top and Daisy Dukes.
Raven's just outright disgust for Stevie Richards makes that duo great.
Yes, Stevie does all the talking because he can't shut up, and then Raven only talks like once every couple of shows.
I think it's the pit bulls as just terrifying muscle.
And then over time, Brian Lee joins the group,
Yeah.
and he's terrifying muscle, and like it just to have a guy that you can never get to, who's just like a mastermind and cuts these intricate promos, and just whenever that guy's on TV, you can't change the channel. There's no end to value for that. That's what Bray Wyatt could be for WWE. Except they're obsessed with keeping him away from other people and just exposing him at every opportunity.
And Dreamer can never beat him.
And that's the
He
thing.
can never beat him. Every single time they fight, he gets fucked over. Like, he just can't. Somebody interferes and costs him the match. He can never beat Raven until his final match against him. The loser leaves ECW match in 1997. He finally beats him.
And the pop for that match is genuinely worth going and looking up. Like
2 years, the discipline that takes.
to have a continuous feud, but one that just like morphs and changes with like different elements coming into play. A feud that goes on constantly for 2 years and never gets old, that still has an opportunity to like grow with all of these different elements, and then to finally pay it off like that. Like that's something that's missing. And it's difficult now that wrestling's basically a television product. It's easier when you're really just going show to show, right? That's different.
And they had 1 hour of TV a week. Like
so like you don't
devote
really have to
3 minutes to the Raven Dreamer feud. We get a quick hitter promo at the end of the show from Raven and a quick one from Dreamer the next week. Like they don't need to fill 15 minutes every single week with these guys.
Like if they did this in WWE now, they'd have 47 matches in 2 years. And they would just be completely overkill and you would never want to see the end of it.
But the biggest story, really in all of wrestling at this moment, was that Sabu had been fired. He really was ECW's top star at this point. Had
without a doubt
put them on the map. He had the misfortune that he was double booked in both ECW and New Japan on the same day. I think both promotions changed the dates on shows, and they used a lot of the same talent. Like Benoit was working both Japan and ECW at this point. They had other guys who were doing both, but they ended up booking shows on the same day, and Sabu, rather than just choosing one, for some reason led both promotions on until he made the right choice to keep his New Japan date, because New Japan, much more prestigious and better paying than, this flea market wrestling promotion in Philadelphia. But according to the dirt sheets, which this reads like it's just Meltzer taking Heyman's dictation, Sabu lied and said he was coming to the ECW show, and of course he didn't. There's some claim that maybe he was under the impression he could do both, which it takes a long time to get from America to Japan. That's not. Hogan might claim that he gained extra days during that flight, but it doesn't actually work that way. And it may I actually worked 400 days one year because I would gain time in the air flying back from Japan because of the time difference.
Here's the wild thing, though, and I've always thought that there had to be something else to this story, because that sucks. Like, Sabu doesn't make your show, and you thought that you were, and you're going to have to scramble. But this is your top guy, and it's not like he necessarily intended to fuck you over, or that he's ever done that in the years before that you've been booking him. For that situation to happen, for you to come out on your show to publicly bury your top star, is such a weird choice.
I will posit a conspiracy theory here.
Oh.
What Sabu ends up doing after ECW fires him is he links up with Heyman's rival, Dennis Coralluzzo, to try to start a territory back in Michigan with the Sheik. My suspicion is maybe they had been talking about that and Heyman found out, and that was why he fired and buried him so hard. Right?
So he just assumed that that's why he didn't show up to the show, was because that would make a ton of sense.
This makes sense to me.
And like Paul Heyman's in the back so high on fucking cocaine, I'm sure, that he's just like, this is a fucking conspiracy.
Yeah. Like, they do start that territory. Like, whether or not they were already... I mean, nothing comes of it. Like, I'd never even heard of it, and I'm from Michigan. I think they probably ran, 3 shows before it folded. I mean, big-time wrestling had gone under 15 years before this. Like, the WWF owned Michigan at that point. But he does end up doing that. But whether or not he was actually negotiating it beforehand, who knows? But that makes sense to me.
Yeah, that's probably how it happened, or at least that's what Paul Heyman thought, and then he forced that into reality, one way or the other. But yeah, let me just reiterate, Sabu absolutely made the right decision to go to New Japan because they probably actually paid him.
Yeah. I have not seen any of that. What are his matches in New Japan like? Does he work like
awesome.
The Sabu style, or does he work a more normal style?
He works a more normal style. It's actually a lot closer. Have you ever seen any Hayabusa matches in FMW?
Yeah.
That's actually probably much closer to what Sabu works than like his ECW stuff. Like, Sabu was a genuinely talented junior heavyweight. And at that time, New Japan had maybe the best junior heavyweight division that ever existed. So he's in there, like, he's mixing it up with some incredible talent. He probably should have just stayed there.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand if somebody didn't like living in Japan or didn't like that travel because it's not easy, but that seems like the best place for him.
Yeah, if you're under 200 pounds at that point, New Japan is where you needed to be because they were making superstars out of
And
people.
I'm so fascinated by the idea of Sabu doing non-hardcore matches. I mean, we raved about that match he had with Cena on whatever pay-per-view that was that we did.
Yeah. Like, he had, let's be very clear, Sabu could wrestle, like, for real, for real. A lot of the botches and stuff were just because he was, like, high and drunk going into his matches. Like, it's not like that's how it always was. His brief run with WCW, those matches are good. Like, any time that he's been challenged to do this, the match for the ECW show that he did for TNA, he fucking killed it. Like, whenever you could get him sober and pointed in the right direction, Sabu would just destroy. So the idea that he could have actually had a career like that is just so fascinating.
Yeah, so he does a few appearances with WCW. I guess he was not working under a contract, which is kind of amazing that they let him wrestle on Nitros and pay-per-views without a contract.
And
But
they were promoting the shit out of him without a contract.
he ends up going back to ECW at November to Remember. They just couldn't quit each other.
Nope.
Um, so yeah, that is the backstory. This is ECW Hostile City Showdown 1995. Goes down April 15th, 1995 at the ECW Arena in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Sellout crowd of about 1,000 in attendance. There's no rating or buy rate here. This is a house show that was later released on VHS. They would do what they call super cards. This is before they're on pay-per-view, but these are the shows that their TV is building to.
Yeah. Like, whenever you think about, like, the big moments in ECW history, most of them happened at these supercards. It's actually funny because most of the big moments in ECW history happened way earlier than people really think of them happening. Like, a lot of ECW history has already taken place by this point, and it's only 1995. But, yeah, so these, for example, like, this is the first one-on-one match between Tommy Dreamer and Raven. This is where the Flaming Brand comes out. A lot of the moments you remember are from these supercards.
The vast majority of the important stuff that happens in ECW is before they get on pay-per-view. Like
Yeah.
the 97, 98, 99, 2000 stuff that people could actually see because it was more broadly available. Really not the good stuff.
No.
I mean, we'll get into this is not a particularly good show either. But
Nope. But, like, what they do is they take these cards and they, like, chop them up into, like, little, like, GIFs, basically. And they, like, air them as, like, stingers in between, like, the television show. So it'd just be like, and now here's a promo from the Sandman, and upcoming is a match. But first, let's watch the time 911 chokeslam Ron Simmons off the top rope.
I do love hardcore TV.
Yeah.
I think that's a great format for a wrestling show.
Like, that's such a better way for... Yeah, I would love it if shows now were like that, where it was literally just, here's an hour. We've, like, sandwiched everything you need to know into 1 hour and just constantly coming at you.
All these, like, just clips and highlights and quick promos, and they could advance so many stories in an hour.
That's all I really want from a wrestling show, is to have a show that I don't want to look away from while it's on.
Yeah, if I were going to come up with my ideal wrestling promotion, I think they would do monthly pay-per-views, and then they would have 1 hour a week of TV. And the TV would mostly be promos with, like, some match clips thrown in there.
Absolutely. And then I would do one of those, like, Saturday morning recap specials for kids. Gotta have one of those.
Yeah.
Just, like, half an hour of highlights just to get you caught up if you haven't watched before the pay-per-view.
On commentary, the Lone Ranger, Joey Styles, thought he did an absolutely excellent job here.
Joey Styles is a god. Like, there's one hole in his game, and we'll kind of get to that as we go through the show. But aside from that, he's the one who stitches all of this together. All of this has so little context to it, and depends so heavily upon you having been at the house shows to see what happened before, or watched the last supercard, which obviously isn't easy to watch. And he makes it all make sense. And he keeps everything running through, and he's calling the match, and he's just so delightful to listen to. He's got so much humor to him. nobody else could have done this. Nobody else ever has done anything like this.
We just cut straight into the first match with no introduction or entrances. Like, Hostile City Showdown appears on the screen for about 5 seconds, and then we're off and running. Like I said, it's a VHS tape. This didn't air on pay-per-view.
Yeah, and I kind of like that because I don't want to see ring announcers announcing a bunch of stuff for this. I don't want to see
did
Mikey Whipwreck's
love
entrance.
the Joey Styles introductions. And I
Yes.
guess they maybe only did those once they were on pay-per-view, but when he would do these like speeches to like pump the crowd up, and he'd be like, "We find them guilty as charged."
Be like, WWF said we could never be on pay-per-view, but here we are, our 6th pay-per-view ever, and those sons of bitches couldn't stop us.
Yeah. And then they threw Joel Gertner in there too.
I hate Joe Gertner.
You would. You would.
Yeah, I
I'd
sure
see
would.
that. Opening match is Mikey Whipwreck versus Stevie Richards. Stevie is part of Raven's flock. Raven is in his corner here. It's the Nest, not the flock. The flock was WCW.
Which is so funny because the flock is so much more indelible to me, even though it was the worst stable by
Way
far.
worse. I think it's a better name, though.
Oh, the flock is fucking amazing.
I feel like I've never quite gotten Mikey Whipwreck. I liked him when he became satanic with the Sinister Minister and Tajiri.
Sure.
I don't know. I don't get like the little loser Mikey Whipwreck.
My favorite thing about Mikey Whipwreck, and this is going to be such a weird thing, but he got the exact same push to start his career that Kenta Kobashi got in All Japan. And I don't know if Paul Heyman was influenced by that, but basically Kenta Kobashi started by just like losing 100 matches in a row. And like he was this big athletic like freak of a man, but like he just couldn't mentally get there. Like he was just a raw green son of a bitch. So like he'd go up against the top talent and he'd give him hell, but he just never won until like his 100th match where he finally won a match, and then he was a main eventer immediately. So that's the idea, right? Is that you fall in love with this guy because he gets so close but can't quite do it. But Mikey Whipwreck went even a step further, and he doesn't even get an offensive move in for like 9 months.
No. And then he ends up being the world champion.
He does get crazy over. Like, you can't deny that. Like, the fans love him. It's just that once he starts doing offensive moves, then you have to grapple with the fact that he's just kind of a tiny guy who's not very interesting.
Raven interferes almost immediately. Mikey bails out and goes backstage. He then brings out a man called Hank Myers, who they call the Shah to back him up. I have never seen this man before in my life.
This guy was just kind of constantly around throughout all of ECW history. Like he's always wrestling like beginning matches with like JT Smith and nobody, just in like he basically is just a guy who just there's no other way you can really put it. I don't know that he ever does anything that's actually all that important or interesting to wrestling history, but the fans do love yelling Shaw every time he hits somebody.
Yeah. Yeah, what they would do is when he would hit somebody, they would yell Shaw. When somebody would hit him, they would yell shit.
I mean, that's pretty good.
Yeah. Whipwreck keeps taking Richards down. He gets Stevie in a submission hold, and the crowd chants Daisy Dukes as Richard yells at them to shut up while he's in the hold. This was funny.
I mean, in terms of cheap heat, Stevie Richards' outfit here is about as good as you can possibly get, right? Just like a cut-off T-shirt and Daisy Dukes in front of the ECW crowd. I mean...
Richards gets out of the hold, hits a sick power bomb.
Yeah, that thing was brutal.
Then Whipwreck catches him with a Frankensteiner and gets the 1, 2, 3. 7-minute opening match. Not a bad match here. I enjoyed this.
It was fine, and like the fans were really into
given
Mikey
what is to come on this card.
Yeah, like if I watched this and I was like, oh, I guess that was fine. If I had realized I was watching the second best match on the card, then I would have been really a lot more into it.
Raven attacks Mikey after the match. Shaw breaks that up, but then the Pit Bulls show up and the numbers are too much for Shaw and Mikey. Public Enemy run down to make the save. They run the heels off, and we can look forward to Public Enemy versus the Pitbulls later in the night.
Look forward to, yes, that's
Or
what I'm
can
doing.
we?
I'm going to try with every fiber of my being to ignore the fact that ECW is just absolutely not the product for me. Like, it's filmed so horribly, as if like
my jaw dropped when I turned this on, how bad the quality was.
I have literally seen like homemade pornos from 1995 that were better lit and produced than this. Like, it's like you had to have been trying to look like shit. It was
so washed out.
Yes. And I'm sure that's just because there was so much light, but like whoever's doing the camera operating clearly does not understand how to do like a light test for a camera. And it just looks like shit. ECW never had particularly good camera stuff. In fact, their later stuff was like way too dark. So like I don't know if they just never had a lot of talent along those lines. But this thing just looked like shit. So like this is not for me. I don't like ultra violence in my matches. It's definitely like I like pomp and circumstance. I like storytelling. I don't really love this kind of thing. I'm going to try to remove myself as much from that as possible. You guys already know that. I'm not trying to beat a dead horse.
Just ruining all of our listeners' childhoods.
Just know that a lot of this is real hot garbage.
Next up, we've got Tony Stetson versus Subo Genjin. I have no earthly idea who either of these guys are.
Normally, I love to jump in here and be like, well, Steve, this is who that Japanese wrestler is. Nope. I have no fucking idea who this guy is.
Is he even Japanese?
Yes, he is. Oh. He has a preposterously long 27-year career. He wrestled a match this year, Steve. Wow. And yet in 27 years, he doesn't appear to have had any important match at all at any time anywhere. He won one title in 27 years.
So Genjin is a Japanese guy wearing face paint and like Jimmy Snuka, like, leopard print gear.
This is clearly an attempt to be like their Muda or something like that. Like,
yes.
It's not working. Tony Stetson is a guy whose last name is a hat.
Thankfully, they edit this down and only show like 30 seconds of it.
That's the best, because they jump in and they show the last 30 seconds like, oh man, this must have been the good 30 seconds. And it's not good.
Yeah. Again, this is a VHS release, so I think they edited a show that was probably, 2.5 hours down to 2.
But that's actually one of my favorite things about this show, is that if we had to watch all 3.5 hours of this, it would have been brutal. Brutal, unwatchable. But cutting it down like this makes it so much easier to watch. Like, all right, well, this match sucks, but it's only 30 seconds, and we're off to the next thing.
Next up, we've got a barbed wire baseball bat match as Ian Rotten takes on Axel Rotten. Ian Rotten previously portrayed Johnny Lawler, the illegitimate son of Jerry the King Lawler in Memphis Wrestling.
I'm taking a deep breath right now because I'm debating whether or not to go all the way in on Ian Rotten, who probably listens to podcasts like these to see if people bury him so he can sue them for libel or whatever. Here's the thing. Ian Rotten is one of the worst human beings who has ever walked the face of planet Earth. He has been responsible for so many horrible events in the history of wrestling, has taken credit for so many people who he only tangentially was related to them getting ahead, that there's no wrestler that I've ever seen or talked about that I've more wished were dead. And that's such a horrible thing to say, but that's just to tell you how awful he is. Now let's move on to the match.
These guys had a hair versus hair match the previous month that Axel won, so Ian got his head shaved. There's a garbage can full of weapons in the ring. Ian attacks Axel while he's cutting a promo. A slugfest ensues. They have a very boring brawl. They both blade. They fight on the floor. Ian gets backdropped into the crowd. Ian puts a trash can on Axel's head and blasts him with the baseball bat. Then Ian hits a DDT on the barbed wire bat and gets the win. This was an awful, awful match. And here, for the first time, I will reference the Wrestling Observer's ratings. This one got 3 stars in the Observer. Kiss my ass.
I have rarely heard Steve get actually mad in all the time that we've been doing this podcast.
I don't care about star ratings. I never get worked up about them, but they were so egregious for this show. I couldn't help myself.
This thing
I don't care about matches getting 6 and 7 stars. I don't care that this match didn't get 5 stars. Doesn't matter to me. It's one guy's opinion, but like these were ridiculous.
This getting 3 stars in an era, it's just, it makes so little sense that
this wasn't even good garbage wrestling.
No, it was nothing. I did like Axel's little promo at the beginning where he's like, hey guys, what kind of match should I have? I'm going to have a fan response. You guys want us to have a strap match? And everyone was like, no, fuck that.
That's Southern wrestling bullshit.
You guys want us to have a baseball bat match? No, boo, fuck you. Barbed wire baseball mat? No, boo, fuck you. What about all of them at the same time? Yay! That is literally where the enjoyment in this match ended. There's one point where Axel puts the barbed wire on the back of Ian's head and literally just splits the back of his head open and then just leaves it in, like dangling from his head. And I'm like, that's okay, that's what we're doing. Oh, this is bad. But, 3 stars, of course.
Next up, we've got Raven versus Tommy Dreamer. I believe this is their first singles meeting. We do actually get to see Raven's entrance. They don't edit that out. Unfortunately, they have to dub over his Offspring entrance theme. I guess we should take a moment and talk about how important music was to ECW and kind of how hard it is to watch these shows on the network where they have to edit out all the real entrance themes.
Yeah, it's not just that the music was important or that they built like the entrance themes were an important part of it, because that's true in every promotion. But literally entire segments of the show were built around it being a music video. Yeah, that was the premise of the entire thing. Is like get the coolest songs and just like focus on that. So if like the Sandman's coming out, you can just do that entrance for like 10 minutes. That's 10 minutes out of your show you don't have to worry about, and people fucking love it.
Dreamer out second. Of course, they have to dub over Man in the Box with an instrumental version.
This one sounds close enough to Man in the Box that I was like, all right.
Yeah, I mean, his WWE theme was just an instrumental version of Man in the Box.
Yeah.
So I think that's what it came out to here.
It's pretty good. Yeah. I don't mind that one at all.
I mean, it's the same thing they did with Taz and War Machine. They just had an instrumental version.
Yeah, and that's smart. Like, you got to find some way to like keep the same feel of the music without changing it completely. I don't have any problem with that.
Yeah, I mean, mostly with wrestling entrance music, it's really just the first couple chords.
Yes, my favorite version of this ever was Christian's music in TNA, which was just that one Evanescence song. It was literally just the song with the lyrics stripped out. It was not changed one note in any way. Yeah, like it was thievery. I'm amazed they got away with that.
TNA, nobody pays any attention to. I mean, that was all TNA's music, right? Everybody's entrance music was a knockoff of a real song.
Yep.
What we call the Jimmy Hart version.
Mm-hmm.
But it was mostly Dale Oliver.
Yeah, it was mostly Dale Oliver. And he did create his own theme songs. Like, it wasn't all that stuff. It's just Kevin Nash would come in and be like, yeah, I want to come out to a Led Zeppelin. So he'd just have to knock off some Led Zeppelin.
What are your favorite ECW themes? I mean, everybody loves Enter Sandman. That's untoppable. What else really stands out to you as great ECW entrance music?
Man in the Box is really, really, really good. Pantera for Rob Van Dam is very, very good. I think I even kind of loved Here Comes the Hot Stepper for Public Enemy because it was just such a good, like, what white guys would think good hip hop was.
Definitely. Which was their characters.
Yeah. So, like, whoever was in charge of this, and maybe it was Paul himself for all I know, just did an amazing job of putting their finger on the pulse of, like, what music would fans want to listen to while they're watching?
Most of it was about 10 years old, so I get the feeling it was just the guys got to pick their own tracks, and it was just what they listened to growing up.
It probably was. And in some cases, like with Raven, it's just like, this is apparently what you think your character would listen to. So here you go. That's what that is.
Yeah.
And it was like a personal playlist that your favorite wrestler was making for you about them.
Raven and Dreamer immediately fight out on the floor and up the aisle, then backstage. Dreamer beats Raven's ass all over the arena. They're fighting like up on the camera platform. Raven gets some shots in. Dreamer does a sick blade job, and he just starts gushing.
The amount of blood on this show.
Damn near every match had blood. Like,
and not just every match, everyone in every match. Like,
yeah, like in the tag match, all 4 guys bleed.
And it's not like, a lot of the time, you won't even know what exactly caused them to bleed. Like, you'd just be watching and be like, oh, that guy's bleeding. I wonder how long he's been bleeding for. There wasn't a
spot that led to it. It wasn't like they got hit with a chair, thrown into the steps. Now they would just, they just juice themselves.
Yeah, at some point it'd just be like, well, time to get my blood for today. Doop, doop, doop.
Not every match on the show can be a bloody hardcore brawl. It got so old during the course of this.
And we've been on record as saying that we wish more blood would come back. Like, that can be a really valuable storytelling
thing. Such overkill.
This is
trash. When I say I want blood, I mean I want blood like a few times a year.
I want contextual blood. I want 2 people who hate each other want to kill each other to make each other bleed. Not this.
Just one really vicious beatdown that the babyface takes to set up their big match. And then when you do the match, he can bust the heel open as revenge.
And this does not mean that I want people to bite the back of each other's necks and have fake blood spurt out like a vampire. That's not what I'm fucking talking about.
Dreamer gets some shots in with a metal sink. Yes, they used everything and the kitchens. I hate this. I hate this spot.
They keep going back to that joke for like another 10 years.
In every Raven match, seemingly.
He just loved that fucking joke. It tickled him so much.
I do want to do some of the WCW pay-per-views that have the really good, like, Raven, Benoit, DDP matches.
Yeah.
That was some good stuff. We did the one where Raven beat DDP for the U.S. title. That was a good one.
Yes. It was such a good collection of, like, awesome and totally different talent that I kind of loved it being a 3-way feud like that. That was probably, would you say that's the best thing that Raven was ever a part of, or at least in the mainstream?
Yeah, because it's not a long list other than that.
It's amazing how little he actually did in wrestling.
Well, he was high the whole time.
Yeah, for a character that resonates like Raven does, and for a character as talented, and for a man as smart as he is, it's kind of amazing that he didn't do more than he did.
Okay, he was never going to get a push in the WWF because he partied with Shane.
Even though it was all Shane, according to everyone.
Yeah, but Vince was never going to believe that. Like, Vince was going to believe that Raven corrupted his innocent son.
I've always just wanted to imagine, like, Vince opening a hotel room, just a string of, like, hookers and blow, and he's just like, Raven,
what have you done to my son? The story of Vince seeing Raven backstage, and, like, JR hired him without knowing the backstory or something.
Yep, and just like, you,
Raven.
And frankly, it's amazing that Vince didn't fire him on the fucking spot.
No, instead he just kept him around and had him kind of do nothing.
Yeah.
His best run in WWE when he was only allowed to wrestle on Heat, and I think they started letting him book the show.
Yeah, they did. They did that with him and Steven Richards at different points.
Stevie Night Heat.
I was a mark for Stevie Night Heat. I fucking loved that. Like, him just owning it.
You know, there's just this appeal to a well-done Wrestling B show. I loved WCW Saturday Night. I loved Velocity when it was just the Benoit Regal show.
Yeah, where it'd just be like one rad-as-hell match. Like, they did, like...
Cruiserweight matches, Paul London.
Yeah, Paul London versus Jimmy Yang, like, 14 times in a row. And I'm like, I'm here for it. Let's go.
Yeah, I think that was when they were like they just told Court Bauer to write the show and let him do whatever he wanted, and nobody cared about it.
Or like Superstars when like Chris Masters redeemed his career by becoming Ric Flair overnight.
Yeah, him and Tyler Rex had an epic series of matches.
Tyler Rex. He dragged Tyler Rex to an epic
Like
series of
literally like a
matches.
4-star match they had.
Chris Masters is genuinely a hero and deserves to be regarded as such.
So what's going on in this match? They go back to the ring. Dreamer gets Raven in a sleeper. Raven manages to drag him through the ropes, and they fall out to the floor. Should note there's no padding on the floor. It's a concrete floor here, and guys take many, many bumps on this concrete over the course of the night.
It's so stupid to take bumps on concrete. It doesn't look more impressive. It doesn't make a sound that indicates that it's more impressive. It just hurts you. Like it doesn't. The difference between what makes an audience think something hurt you and what actually hurts you is what the art of professional wrestling is supposed to be.
It's a lesson that is lost in ECW where they actually hurt each other and the fans know it's not real.
Yeah. So you have to continually hurt each other worse and worse to convince anyone that it actually hurts. That's not wrestling.
And that's how you get New Jack stabbing people.
Well, and New Jack just really likes stabbing people.
I was disappointed by the lack of New Jack on this show.
Oh God, yeah, we missed out on that. Someday.
Back in the ring, Raven hits Dreamer with the even flow DDT, then another one, and then a third. Raven lazily covers, and he only gets 2. Raven sets up for a DDT on the floor. He blocks it and DDTs Raven. That is a rough move to take on the concrete.
It really is. Because the guy has your head tucked under his arm. If too much of your head is exposed out the back, you are going to hit your head on the concrete.
Ricky Steamboat got knocked out taking that bump.
Yeah,
Jake Roberts.
If you don't do it right, man, it's so easy to get hurt.
Back in the ring, Dreamer covers, but Richards interferes. Dreamer gets him with the DDT. Then he hits the referee with a DDT. Beulah gets in the ring. They have to do the spot where Dreamer pile drives her and her skirt comes up.
Have to, yeah.
Every single Tommy Dreamer match. Every single one.
Women only exist in the ECW universe to be harmed. That's their
Or
purpose.
make out with each other.
Yes, women are only bad guys in this universe. They are always heel managers, constantly. And their purpose in the match is for the guys to finally get their hands on them and then brutally hurt them. If that tells you anything about the audience that we're dealing with, it's pretty evocative.
Yeah, if this was actually going to be a progressive, forward-thinking wrestling promotion, wouldn't they have had women's wrestling?
You could never have put women's wrestling on in front. Not even like Manami Toyota versus Aja Kong. You never could have put that on.
No, the crowd would have just chanted, "Show your tits."
Yes. Like that would have been a nightmare.
This is what they're dealing with. The match is apparently over. Dreamer leaves through the crowd, and was he announced as the winner here?
He was.
He didn't win by pinfall, though.
Even though, isn't the idea that he can't beat Raven?
The referee.
Yes, so he was, but you can't get disqualified.
Styles was yelling that it should be a disqualification, and I'm like, this is ECW.
There are no disqualifications.
I don't know.
I don't know. They officially can't possibly chalk this up as a win for Dreamer because that would punch a huge hole in the idea that he never beats Raven, right?
Maybe they didn't decide they were going to do that until after this.
I mean, I'm sure they could retcon it. It's not like this footage was readily available for a while.
Massive ECW chants as Dreamer leaves through the crowd. He would later describe this as the first time that the ECW fans truly accepted him.
The moment where he stands up after pile driving Beulah and holds his hand out into Raven's pose, the fans lose their shit. And it really does feel like the moment that they're like, that's our guy. We love him. He represents us. This is perfect. And also in that moment, you can see the outline of all of his cock and balls and his tights because for some reason they have bunched up right there. So,
he does not look right in anything but athletic pants.
No, he's wearing wrestling tights, but also just a bulky t-shirt. This is not a good look.
No. It's better than the suspenders he was wearing back when Sandman caned him.
Yeah, that's a nightmare.
Next up, for the ECW TV title, we've got Eddie Guerrero defending against Dean Malenko. Guerrero has just recently debuted in ECW and won the TV title from Scorpio in his very first match. Scorpio had won the belt from Malenko. Malenko was a double champion before that because him and Chris Benoit were the tag champions. No Benoit on this show. I think he's on a New Japan tour.
Probably, yeah.
No one in the crowd is watching this for the first 5 minutes. They're all distracted by something happening at ringside.
My favorite part is at one point in the first 5 minutes when they're like doing that thing where like you got to do a bunch of moves and then you like face off with each other. They do like 3 of those. And Joey's like, You'll never see wrestling like this in any other major promotion, only here in ECW. And literally as he's done saying that iconic line, somebody in the crowd yells, boring!
Yeah. I got to go on a rant here that, like, when people try to put ECW over, they talk about stuff like this. And, like, yeah, they did have some matches like this. And they had, Mysterio versus Psychosis. This was 1% of what happened in ECW. 99% of it was garbage hardcore wrestling. And that was what people actually liked. And, like, that's okay. People can like what they want to like, but I don't like when people pretend that ECW was built around this kind of stuff. It was not.
Yeah.
The fans were not into this. They were not into this match at all, and then they gave it a big standing ovation after the time limit draw because they knew that was what they were supposed to do.
And if you watch like the Rise and Fall of ECW DVD, you'll just see like Paul Heyman just furiously jerking himself off to the idea that he brought this style of wrestling to America, that he brought the luchadors to America, that he's responsible for good professional wrestling emerging in the United States of America again. And look, man, like, come on. You had these guys for like 6 months total, all of them. Like, this was not the major part of your product. This show is 99.9% bloody unnecessary brawling and like 1% this, and you can't pretend like this was the 1% that really meant something to you. You can't do that.
No. These guys are all in WCW by the fall.
Which is, well, they should be.
Yeah.
I mean, like, Paul Heyman is the first, like, jumps on the horse of trying to get all of these Mexican wrestlers after the economy fails first, but Bischoff's coming. Like, Bischoff basically bases his entire expansion plan around, well, let's buy that entire country's worth of wrestlers and then move on to Japan.
Yeah. Malenko works over Guerrero's leg. Guerrero comes back with a super Frankensteiner, but he's slow to cover and Malenko kicked out. Malenko gets Guerrero with a Hurricane Rana over the top rope to the floor. That is a very risky move on the concrete.
It is, you're right.
Malenko goes for a plancha but misses. Splat right on the concrete.
Ugh, can we get some pads, man?
They're doing this in front of 1,000 people.
And these are two guys who, literally, Eddie Guerrero was drawing like 30,000 people houses like a year ago.
They don't need to do this stuff.
No. Why? You're in the mid-card, wrestling for the mid-card belt and an indie promotion in front of 1,000 people. Settle down.
Guerrero does a crossbody down to the floor. Looked like he slammed his knee right into the concrete when he landed.
Depressing.
Back in the ring, Guerrero hits a brain buster, then a frog splash, but it only gets 2. A pump handle backbreaker by Guerrero, then a sunset flip powerbomb off the top rope for another 2 count. And the bell rings, and we've hit the time limit. No countdown. They just rang the bell.
Yep. And
that's not how you book a time limit draw.
The crowd's very confused. They didn't give us any warnings. They say, like Joey on commentary says that it's been 30 minutes, but it
25.
hasn't. It's been 25.
No. And not 25 on the dot. It was like 25-30. They just stretched it and claimed it was 30. Or maybe the match was clipped. I don't think so. I think this match was in full. I didn't.
Yeah, I kind of feel like they were just
clip.
like, we're starting to lose the crowd. Let's call it now.
This got 4 3/4 stars in the Wrestling Observer. It was good. It was not nearly that good.
Guys, it got 4 and 3, nearly perfect rating in the Wrestling Observer.
Same rating that Shawn and Taker at WrestleMania 25 got.
And let me just say that there are people who would be like, well, there just wasn't wrestling like this at this point. There just weren't that many good matches. In wrestling history up to this point, good matches hadn't really been prioritized. I've heard all of those arguments before. And the reason all of those arguments are bullshit is because All Japan King's Road has been happening for 5 fucking years. And nobody knows that better than Dave Meltzer, who literally masturbates to that at night. So please do not tell me that he did not know that this was not a 4 3/4 stars match. Please.
And New Japan's junior division that all these guys wrestle in?
Yes. So he's been giving 5-star matches to genuine 5-star matches. And he really, genuinely, with his whole actual heart, thought that this belonged there. We don't usually get baked up in ratings, but this is such an obvious example of, well, I'm just going to promote this brand because Paul Heyman's nice to me.
Yeah. No real question about that.
And it's not a bad match. If you told me it was 3.5 stars, cool.
Like,
I'm
yeah.
good.
Maybe 4. I can live with that.
It genuinely was the kind of thing that you couldn't see very much in America. I don't blame anybody for thinking that this was a really cool moment and a very good match to watch. Not at all. It's just not that.
Next up, for the ECW World Heavyweight Championship, we've got Shane Douglas defending against the Sandman. For 385 days, Shane Douglas has reigned as a ECW champion, but it's coming to an end tonight because he is going to the WWF, which will be the worst mistake of his career.
I keep thinking every time ECW guys took the big money and went elsewhere, it never worked out for any of them.
No.
Not one single time. Public Enemy ruined their careers by leaving. Raven arguably became a big success, but he hated it with his whole heart.
The guys it worked out for weren't real, like Benoit, Guerrero, Steve Austin weren't really ECW guys. They were just passing through.
Yeah, like the guys who like really
Mick
win.
Foley, the one exception.
Yes, that's true. For everyone else, it was just a nightmare of being buried, and Shane Douglas is the worst of the group. Because at this point, Shane Douglas is the hottest non-WWE talent in the world. Like, he is the top star of the top non-2 company. He's got to be fielding offers left and right. He chooses to go to WWF because he hates WCW so much, and they bury him 7 feet under because 6 feet's not enough.
Yeah, he gets to be Dean Douglas, the wrestling teacher.
Somehow he pisses off like all of the most important people in the entire wrestling industry.
Yeah, manages to make the Clique absolutely hate him, so he will never be able to get a job again.
And I'm sure at the time he was just like, these 4 bullies. Oh, well, it doesn't matter if they don't like me.
Yeah.
Well, it turns out that they've run wrestling for the entire remainder of his career.
Yeah, when am I ever going to see these guys again?
Whoops, turns out they're in charge of everything forever.
Yeah, you're never getting in the Hall of Fame, Jack.
Say it's 2020, the Clique still runs wrestling.
Never getting a Legends deal, never getting to be in any of the video games, never getting any merchandise, never getting an appearance on any of the reunion shows.
Nope. You are a laughingstock for life because you pissed off 4 men.
You think he might be better about that?
Oh, I think he's bitter about a lot of things, Steve.
Sandman out first with his beer drinking entrance. Of course, they have to dub over Enter Sandman. You know, there's no way to simulate. Like, there's no dub of that song that's going to go right. Like, nothing you can do.
And like they dub it over with his WWE theme, which, you know, I still kind of like it. It's still a
good song.
It captures the essence of Sandman. It's just not the same.
Oh, I don't know how this works, but I'm surprised they can't use the Motorhead version.
That's interesting. I'm sure they just don't think it's worth it.
Douglas is out second. He's backed up by Woman. Sandman gets in some cane shots. It occurs to me that this is where Nancy and Benoit would have first met.
Oh, I think you're right. Yeah. Well,
Yeah, because she wasn't in WCW back in like '93 when Benoit had his run there.
Now, they wouldn't have gotten involved yet. I mean, not until Kevin
I
Sullivan
don't
literally forces
think
them to sleep with each
so.
other. I
That's
mean,
not far off, though.
yeah, you're right. I mean, I think the timeline that we've established is that Kevin Sullivan literally forces them to have sex with each other. So that's later. But yeah, it would have been right around this time. Also, it really sucks. It really sucks. She was an amazing valet, one of the best of this era. And it sucks that I can no longer look at her without being like,
Now, it's such a shame she will never get a Hall of Fame induction, will never even exist. Like, she has been erased from, like, more so than Benoit erased
Yeah.
from wrestling history, I'd say.
She's just not mentioned. He was erased, but it left a gap. She's just never existed.
Sandman gets in some cane shots, but Douglas recovers and takes control. They fight on the floor. Sandman gets a chair and stalks Woman, but Douglas cuts him off with a baseball slide. Sandman hits a front suplex out on the floor. They go back in the ring. Sandman goes for a leg drop off the top rope, but Douglas rolls out of the way. Douglas gets Sandman in the crossface chicken wing. Woman hits him in the knee with a crutch. He falls back, and Sandman gets him in a pin. We've got a double cross. Woman is with Sandman, and he's the new ECW champion.
And apparently the storyline is that she was with him all along. This has just been a long con on Shane Douglas. LOL.
That's Sandman, one devious guy. He pretended to be blind that one time.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite of all time. I just want to say that while it doesn't seem like it should make sense, they do a little thing in the ring after what we're going to talk about, what Shane Douglas does. Where just Sandman is like on one knee and he's holding the belt, and Woman comes in and she's holding the Singapore cane, and he like offers the belt to her and she offers the cane to him, and then they pose together, and I'm like, this Beauty and the Beast shit right here, it's kind of working for me.
Yeah. I don't think it lasts long because she goes to WCW not long after this.
But just the idea of this like glamorous like person who's like manipulative and like absolutely controls the belt, whoever happens to have it, and this like chain smoking drunk redneck, it's kind of, I love it.
Douglas puts on a Monday Night Raw shirt to get heat, and fans throw trash at him. You know, this was the work shoot way of revealing he was leaving. He tells the fans to kiss his ass.
And then as he runs through the back, Joey Styles yells, "The franchise has left the building."
They'll miss him so much.
That's the funny part, is it turns out they didn't need him, and then by the time he comes back, nobody cares.
Next up, for the ECW tag titles, we've got Public Enemy versus the Pitbulls. I do love Public Enemy's entrance. I love getting the whole crowd to do the hey, ho.
Public Enemy really don't get enough credit. They were really the first act that got over in ECW. Like, they predate pretty much all of this other stuff. They started like right in '93 when like nothing else was really working out. This is the first act that Heyman really got over on his own. So like that's special. Like they mean something for ECW. They're also the first ones to leave, really. Or I guess Douglas is the first one to leave, but they leave like soon after this too, don't they? And they go to
WCW very soon. They show up in WCW in the fall, I think.
It doesn't, like, they wind up winning the belts. Like, they do a lot of like 3-way tags with like the Nasty Boys and Harlem Heat and crap like that. It's not really a good fit, and they come back. Then they go to WWE in 1999.
I'm fascinated by that run.
It is absolutely crazy. They come in, they piss off everyone immediately, because when they went to WCW, they had spurned the WWF. WWF made them the offer first. They told them to go fuck themselves, went to WCW instead. So when they finally come, everyone in WWF who are like, hey man, we needed you to help win the war. Where the fuck were you? Now they hate them. And then they have a match with the Acolytes where they decide to no-sell for the Acolytes.
Bad idea.
Which, of any two people
They'll
in the history
make
of
you
wrestling.
sell if you don't want to.
I say they were just supposed to do a job. They decided they didn't want to do it the way it was planned, so they decided to start no selling. So Bradshaw and Farouk just stiffed the bejesus out of them.
Yeah.
And then they're just done. They're done. And that's their career. They never do anything of note after that. Leaving ECW literally kills them. It's rough.
Public Enemy won the tag belts last week at three-way dance and the aforementioned three-way dance against the Pitbulls and Dean Malenko and Chris Benoit. The Pitbulls have Stevie Richards in their corner since they're part of Raven's Nest. What do you make of the Pitbulls? I think the bigger one seems like he should have had a bigger career.
The funny thing to me is that the Pitbulls have been around for like a while at this point. They wrestled the Hart Foundation in like 87. Like they are
Where?
In WWF.
Really?
Yeah, they were like a jobber team for WWF for years. I never would have thought that.
No.
I mean, they have a physique that's totally unlike anything else in ECW.
They are seemingly the only guys in ECW who work out.
Or like have steroids at least. They're not sharing with anybody else, that's for sure.
Ron Simmons.
Yeah, I like so much the idea of this team of just being like the only two muscle men in the entire company, and they just bludgeon the shit out of people. I guess which one's the one who gets like his neck broken, and the other one gets like a singles push?
Oh, I can never remember.
Yeah, there's the bald one and the one with hair. I never remember which one.
Two has hair.
Yeah, I think you're right. At any rate, like I thought that they both had potential, but they couldn't talk. They couldn't really wrestle that well. It's just that they had amazing physiques, and that's what made them stand out.
Especially for this company at this time.
The other depressing thing, and we really haven't been bringing it up on this show because it really only compounds how sad it is, but almost everyone on this show is dead.
Yeah, do we need to do like a count here on how many of these guys have died?
Well, 3 of the 4 people in this match are dead. And 3 of these 4 people were dead by 2006.
Yeah.
Like it's
when they did the reunion show. Yeah.
Yeah. Like the survival rate of people in ECW.
Axel Rotten dead?
Yes, I think so.
Eddie.
Yep.
Douglas and Sandman are still kicking. Yeah, 3 of the 4 in this match.
Yeah. Somehow Terry's still around.
Yeah. 911?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Like it's a good amount of people, but like this match specifically is like it's horrible. The Public Enemy basically lose their careers and then immediately die, and it's tragic.
Pitbull 2 throws Rocco Rock over the top rope through a table on the floor. They both beat up Johnny Grunge. They throw him out to the floor as Rocco gets back in. Rocco hits a springboard moonsault on a standing Pitbull 1 in the ring. Not a move I've seen very many times.
That ruled. Like these guys could actually go. Like
a guy who's 270 pounds doing that.
They didn't often get the opportunity to do that much, but when they did, like they could actually fucking do some shit.
Grunge does a moonsault through a table. They go back to the floor. Lots of slow brawling. All of them are bleeding. This match really drags. Should also mention this match got 4 stars in the Observer.
This match is 17 minutes long. This match could have easily been 5 minutes long, and it would have all the same content in it. The amount of time they just spend wandering around. And like that to me is like the most egregious thing a match could do. Like, all right, if it's a bad match, it's a bad match, but don't just waste my time.
Yeah. Other than the Malenko Guerrero match, I think this is the only other match to go 10 minutes on this show.
That's something.
The Pitbulls set up for a double powerbomb off the top rope. Rocco counters that with a Hurricane Rana, but the pin gets broken up. Then Grunge hits a reverse DDT. Rocco goes for a Swanton bomb, but he misses. And then Rocco gets a schoolboy for the pin. Public Enemy retain. Did not enjoy this.
No, it was not enjoyable. It's not that I think that these guys couldn't have a good match, but like this was not the right circumstances.
We join the next match in progress. It's 911 versus Ron Simmons, and we see like literally 30 seconds of it as Simmons tries to superplex 911. 911 blocks it and choke slams Simmons off the top rope and pins him.
Thank Christ we only got a couple of minutes of this. Or like only a couple of seconds of this.
Yeah.
Steve, tell the people who 911 is.
Just a big dude who choke slams guys. He's one of the worst wrestlers of all time.
Yep, that's a pretty fair way to put it. He is genuinely one of the worst wrestlers of all time. And
he like got mega over with this gimmick, which was just that he would choke. I mean, it's, you know who he is? He's Baron Corbin. And Baron Corbin got super over in NXT when he would just hit the end of days on guys, and that was his whole gimmick.
Yes, that was the time where I proclaimed that Baron Corbin would draw money in this business. And, like, that's the worst, like, cold take that I've ever delivered.
I thought he was money, too. I just loved it when all he was doing was nailing guys at the end of days. And, like, the crowd would chant how long his match was going.
Yes. They'd just be like, fuck. They would get like 30 seconds, 40 seconds, and he'd be like, whoop, time to go home.
Yeah. It's hard not to get over when you just squash guys, as we've established.
As we've established, the one true cool thing in wrestling is squash matches, and they should just always do them.
I need to ask, why is Ron Simmons getting jobbed out? Why is Ron Simmons not one of the top guys in this promotion?
Now, at first, when we were looking through this, I was like, well, this was one of his last appearances in the company. So obviously he's just on his way out. He doesn't go to WWE for like another year.
Yeah, he doesn't debut in WWE until like SummerSlam 96, I think, or the summer of 96.
Maybe they just couldn't afford to pay him, I don't know. But like, he is so much better than anyone else you have on this roster. Are you fucking kidding me?
Just going by Wikipedia, it's got nothing for him between like this early 95 and when he debuts in the WWF in July 96.
That's so wild to me.
Yeah, I don't know what happened in between. Like,
it had to have been a money thing, right? Like, I'm sure he was expecting like a certain amount of money, but like 2 years ago he was the first Black World Champion.
Yeah.
But now he's here doing jobs to 911?
Man. All right. It's main event time. It's the match that hundreds and hundreds of people have come to see. It's Terry Funk versus Cactus Jack. We're going to find out who the true king of hardcore is. This is the year they have their legendary death match in Japan. I think that's in the fall.
Why do you think that ECW never tried to put on something like that? Like, ECW very carefully never trips the line to, like, exploding ring death matches and shit. And it might just be...
Didn't have the money?
It also might be that, like, I don't know if ECW had to abide by, like, the local...
code?
Yeah.
Apparently not, based on what happened in this match.
You're right. Or just, like, state...
Athletic Commission?
Yes, that's what I was looking for. Yeah, like, I don't know if that plays any role in this whatsoever. I don't know.
I think it might be. I know. New York's a commission state. I think they had to have floor mats when they were in New York because that was a requirement.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just it does seem weird that like all the really hardcore stuff happens elsewhere.
Yeah, FMW is having its, I guess you'd call it legendary run at this point.
I mean, Onita, the magical thing about Onita is like, Atsushi Onita is like Paul Heyman if he was also a wrestler at the same time, so he could just put himself over. And so he winds up becoming like literally a household name because of all of this FMW stuff. And nobody else gets over at all. Just him.
Funk is out first to what sounds like Ode to Joy.
It does sound like that. Like, really? Ode to Joy? That's
I know
what you're doing?
in later years, his ECW entrance music was Desperado.
Now that was great music. I really like that.
Funk gets on the mic. He says they can skip the goddamn introductions because everybody knows who the hell they are and where they're from.
Love that.
Then Cactus gets on the mic. He says he wants Funk to come fight him out in the crowd like a real man. Should note both guys were dealing with injuries here, so they were not physically capable of doing a whole lot.
That explains why nothing happens in this match whatsoever.
They fight up on the bleachers. Funk gets some chair shots. Cactus fights back. He sets up a table. He tries an elbow off the platform, but Funk moves and Cactus crashes through the table. They go back to ringside. Funk hangs Cactus upside down in the guardrail and beats his legs with a chair.
That was pretty cool, actually.
Funk throws a table into the ring. He ends up getting thrown into it by Cactus. Cactus goes to the top rope. Funk hits him in the head with a table. Cactus does his front flip senton off the apron. That is an insane move for a guy his size.
Yeah, fucking... Every time I see it, I'm like, stop, please, don't do that.
Cactus gets a trash can. He hits Funk with it. Funk smashes a bottle on Cactus's head and then proceeds to carve up his arm with the broken bottle.
And then, in a much-needed moment of levity from the match, the ref pulls him off and he's just like, I'm just trying to give him a nose job.
You egg-sucking dog. Mikey Whipwreck shows up to try to help Cactus, but Funk kicks his ass. Shaw shows up as well. He also gets beaten up. A lot of Shaw on this show.
Little too much Shaw.
Yeah, could have done without this much Shaw. Funk tries the spinning toe hold, but Cactus rolls him up. That only gets 2. Cactus hits a DDT on a chair. Sandman shows up. He goes for a cane shot on Cactus, but accidentally hits Funk. Cactus hits another DDT on Funk and gets the pin. After the match, Sandman canes Cactus. Funk then comes in with a flaming Brandon iron and blows a massive fireball into Cactus's face.
I don't like being a killjoy historically. That's not a role that I enjoy playing. This is so completely, wildly irresponsible that
horrible idea.
It just made me like furious as I watched it. Like, how dare you bring a flaming brand to like the fucking bleachers are wood. We're in like a tiny enclosed space. The ring is made of canvas. What are you doing?
I had only ever really read about this stuff with the Brandon iron in Foley's book. And I was always kind of like, oh, how did it set stuff on fire? Because I was picturing, a brand that you've like pressed on hot coals or whatever.
Yeah.
Not one that's actually on fire.
And like, not only is Terry Funk waving this thing the fuck around, but after they get out of the ring, Terry Funk is literally like jabbing it at him. We're like 1 feet from the crowd. The crowd that is like reaching over the barricade and reaching for the guys. Like, this is preposterously unsafe. And then the way they get out of it is that Terry Funk like jabs it at Cactus. Cactus has to reach over the flame, grab it halfway down the pole, and take it out of Terry's hand. Which, it's a miracle nobody gets hurt here.
This time.
Miracle. Yeah.
But
eventually they'll do it again, and he will, for sure.
Yeah, not long after this, they knock the branding iron into the crowd and it sets somebody on fire?
Yeah. No fucking shit. The crowd is right there.
This is such a bad idea.
It just... If I were somebody in the crowd and that happened, like, the lawsuit I would lever against Paul Heyman. Like, it's just astounding.
There was a lawsuit, but God, somehow I don't think the guy won any money.
Yeah, Paul Heyman just wriggled out of shit. His dad was a lawyer, and he'd just always get away with it.
Oh, man.
This is irresponsible. Like, that's the only thing that I can say about it. It's not enough to just say, that this was bad or that this could have gone bad. Like, this is bullshit. Fire wrestling can be done relatively safely. We've all seen it done. Lighter fluid on top of a table, you put them through it. When the accelerant's gone, the flame is gone. That's how you control it in as much as you can.
Yeah.
This, you just lit a metal stick on fire and poked it at a guy.
So yeah, Cactus gets the thing away from it, and he chases Funk off, and that is the end of the show. I don't know what to make of this. This was not in any sense a good show, but I still enjoyed watching it.
Here's the thing. Like, I said that this is not really for me, and that remains the case. There were moments of the show that I genuinely enjoyed watching. There are ECW moments that I ride or die for. I don't want you to think that I want to bury all of it. I am one of the most ardent advocates of the Taz Sabu match that have ever existed. God, I love that feud so fucking much. It makes me crazy. Like, the stories that they were able to tell, the way that Paul was able to hide a lot of these people's weaknesses was genius.
Well, I mean, as much as we just bagged on 911, he got huge over just choke slamming guys.
Yeah, even though he really, really sucks.
Al Snow became a superstar in ECW.
Yeah, like, I don't want to take anything away from that. Like, there was genius level booking and creativity going on in this promotion. There's also a lot of cocaine being done, and you can tell by the way these matches take place.
Yeah, let's play, which side of the line did this fall on? The crucifixion angle.
I am not a particularly religious person, but it did seem a bizarre step to take.
Yeah.
It seemed like a real risk that didn't need to be taken, but I thought it was interesting.
It cost them Kurt Angle.
That's the fun. That's one of those
Kurt Angle was at that show. He did commentary on a Taz match, and I'm pretty sure they were just gonna job him out to Taz, but they were setting up Kurt Angle versus Taz, and he was so offended by the crucifixion angle that he told them that if they ever used the footage of him on the show, he would sue them.
And he wasn't just offended. He held it against Paul Heyman for the rest of his career. And man, what if you put him in the ring with Taz and then you find out that he's really good and you can actually work with him, and then you just have Kurt Angle?
How about the storyline where Raven turned Sandman's son against him?
Loved it, 100%.
Love that.
That's one of the best storylines in wrestling history. I will not hear any word said wrong against that.
What was the lesbian moment? Was that Beulah and Lita?
No, it was Kimona and Beulah. Yeah. Where it turns out that Beulah had been cheating, or Beulah had been cheating, and they found out that it was
Dreamer, but no, wait.
It was
she with Dreamer at that point? I can't remember the mechanics of this one.
Okay, there was one where Beulah was pregnant, and Raven thought that Stevie did it, but it wasn't. And then it turned out that she wasn't pregnant, she was just cheating on Raven. And then it turns out that Tommy thought that it was his baby, but when they found out that she wasn't pregnant and was just having lesbian sex with Kimona, he decided then that he would fuck them both.
It was pretty exploitative.
That's just trash. How about the moment where the crowd was really mad because the show wasn't going on? So Paul Heyman, they say, talked Kimona into doing a striptease, but other versions have it being tried to blackmail her into doing it.
Yeah, Paul Heyman, pretty scummy guy.
Yeah. Imagine you're just in a wrestling crowd and then a woman comes out and just starts getting naked. I can't imagine a more uncomfortable place to be.
The grossest men in the world in that audience.
Yeah. Just, not great.
I mean, obviously the mass transit incident, way, way over the line.
Horrifying, absolutely. Absolutely.
New Jack really should have gone to prison for that.
And so there are a lot of these moments that are definitely on the line. But all things considered, ECW was actually kind of tame. They could have gone so much further than they actually did in a number of ways. like in terms of like the ultra violence, they never really got there.
True. They didn't do like true death matches, I'd say. Like there's no
They did like the
glass
scaffold.
tubes or God, I hate scaffold matches. No glass tubes like the really sick stuff that you would see in FMW or CZW.
Yeah, like the things that I've seen for Cuse reviews periodically, I would have to cover like just like my favorite is the Caribbean Spider Death match with like Necro Butcher and Madman Pondo or some shit. And like I would watch these matches and like they had no redeeming value. It was just like snuff films that you were watching. ECW never got to that point. And maybe it was because Paul Heyman very specifically didn't want it to get there and refused to let it go there. And if so, then that was good of him to be able to walk that line. But still, it's not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, all in all, a complicated legacy for ECW.
Yeah. Like it did a lot of things. God knows that the wrestling industry was driven forward by its existence, and they accomplished something they should not have been able to accomplish. At the same time, in 2020, going back and looking at these shows, they suck so much ass.
Yeah.
If you're playing the Lawcast drinking game at home, that's a big drink. It sucked ass.
Oh, so that is a wrap for Hostile City Showdown 1995. We'll have to do some more ECW shows. Even if they're not good, they give us a lot of material to talk about. It's ground we haven't worn. It reminds me of like when we first started doing this and we had so many things to talk about. And now we do a WWE show and we've already talked about everything.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not that we're going to run out of things to talk about anytime soon, because like literally every 6 months, every wrestling promotion changes so entirely. And there's so many moments throughout wrestling history. Like, don't think that we're winding down or anything like that. It's just that we're so overwhelmed with everything we want to say about these ECW characters, because like you said, we've only talked about any of these people once, if at all. So yeah, we have plenty more ground to cover.
Yeah.
And with TNA, and with Ring of Honor, and with the territories, and with Japan, we haven't even scratched the surface.
So yeah. In terms of things we have to cover, I'm really excited about this next one. We're gonna do something a little more recent, although it's hard to believe this show is 5 years old. It's Elimination Chamber 2015, aka the night Kevin Owens beat John Cena in his first WWE match.
Yeah, remember when they called up Kevin Owens and he was going to wrestle John Cena and we were all depressed about it, but then he fucking beat him in an amazing match?
I don't think I've watched that match since it happened, so I'm really excited to go back and watch it. And there's a lot of other interesting stuff on this show. There's 2 Elimination Chamber matches that I didn't remember happened.
And neither one of them have anything to do with the world title at all.
Nope. Yeah. So yeah, we're going to get into a lot of guys we've really never gotten to talk about because we just haven't covered a lot of the last 10 years of WWE.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the breakup of the Shield and heel Seth Rollins and the Authority. We're going to talk about the failed Ascension, the Tyson Kidd and Cesaro, the greatest tag team of all time.
The New Day finally getting over.
Yeah, Nikki Bella's gigantic heel run.
Yeah.
Like
that's another. I feel like that's another show where there is something interesting in every single match. Daniel Bryan's career being in jeopardy. Sheamus getting a new look, new attitude, and the promise we thought that character had when they gave it to him. Bad News Barrett getting a really hot run and then getting the rug pulled out from under him. A lot to talk about next time.
Oh yeah, hell yeah.
So very, very soon. Thanks for listening. We'll see you again next time.